So my spirit and my flesh are kind of mirrored with my soul in the first clause, crieth out for the living God. So I don't know if Hebrew poetry parallelism helps with memorization or if it just confuses things. But I found it's always a joy to run into a piece of ancient poetry, something that I have enjoyed looking at through the years. Let me ask you, though, what does this memory text have to do with our lesson? Before you answer that, the authors of our quarterly mention this book, The Sabbath. Have you heard of this book? Abraham Joshua Heschel. It's kind of a classic on the Sabbath, written by a Jewish scholar and rabbi. And I returned to it as I was getting ready here, and I found this something that I had pointed out to myself long ago, and it's just something that I just want to start out with it. And because the folks who wrote this quarterly mention it, I just want to bring something up here on page 75. Just a short paragraph. There is much that philosophy could learn from the Bible. To the philosopher, the idea of the good is the most exalted idea, going back to, at least in the Western tradition, Socrates, the good with a capital G. To the philosopher, the idea of the good is the most exalted idea. But to the Bible, the idea of the good is penultimate. What does that mean, penultimate? You heard that word? Penultimate means not the ultimate, but almost the ultimate. Literally, it means just before the last. So to philosophers, the good is the ultimate. To the Bible, however, it's just one step below the good. It cannot exist, that is, the good cannot exist without the holy. The good is the base, the holy is the summit. Things created in 6 days he considered good. The seventh day he made holy. So that's kind of, if you look back and you read, and he saw that it was good, and he saw that it was good. But the seventh day he sanctified and made it holy. So I think that's something that we can keep in the back of our minds as we move forward. But Psalm 84:2, my soul longeth, yea, even fainteth, for the courts of the Lord. My spirit and my flesh crieth out for the living God. What does that text have to do with the Sabbath? It's our memory verse for the week. What has it to do with what we're studying this whole quarter? So what words in the memory verse give you the sense that we need a break? It faints. My heart faints. My flesh cries out for the living God. I think as I move through the lesson, and you're going to help me unravel some of these knots, I think, that the quarterly authors have given to us. But yeah, my soul faints. Now, is this because do we faint and do we cry out because modern life is uniquely difficult? Was this given to us in the modern world? Is this a promise for those of us in the modern world with our uniquely modern difficulties with scheduling? Yeah. Yep. And of course, the irony was that we really couldn't meet together when we really needed it, needed it the most. That first page, the Sabbath lesson, just a kind of a snapshot of modern life. Standing in line at the grocery store, looking around a messy apartment, waiting for Sabbath to come, but even Sabbath has its schedules, as we know. Worn and weary, Sunday, June 27. I read that quote from Heschel, how the Sabbath was the ultimate in the Bible, whereas to the philosophers, the good was the ultimate, and the good doesn't quite cut it. Now, if you would, Genesis 2, 1 to 3. Go to Genesis 2, 1 to 3. Is the Sabbath just for modern folks? Is it just for us? What does Genesis 2, 1 to 3 say? Anyone willing to read that? Why would God create the Sabbath in the midst of a perfect paradise? And are you speaking of a relationship with God and with whom? So, is it fair to say that God foresaw that his creation would need a relationship? Completed work. His work was complete, but the ultimate was the Sabbath. What do you think? In a paradise, a perfect paradise, literally a walled garden, Sabbath was necessary. There's a question here at the bottom, page 7. What about your own harried existence? What we were talking about, fainting, heart attack. What can you do? What can we do to better experience the rest that God wants us to have? And already I'm looking and it's 10:15. We're a third of the way through. What can you do? What can we do? I mean, obviously when we get to the end, I hope that we have some sort of notion about how this lesson applies to our lives. shutting it out. I don't want to spend too much time on Heschel, but having trouble with that paper. One thing that he points out is in the Jewish dichotomy, it's not spirit and flesh, it's holy and profane. So we are full of the profane, and the profane is everywhere. It proliferates. So when we shut off and dive into that, what phrase did you use? Enter into that relationship. That's the sacred. There's plenty of profane to go around. Thank you very much. Yeah. Help me out here. Jeremiah 45, 1-5. I found this to be an unusual passage. I don't know. An intriguing inclusion in this lesson. Jeremiah 45. I'm reading from King James. It's my grandfather's Bible. I'm partial to the King James. The word that Jeremiah the prophet spake unto Baruch, the son of Neriah, when he had written these words in a book at the mouth of Jeremiah, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, saying, that's quite a mouthful, thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, unto thee, O Baruch, thou didst say, woe is me now, for the Lord hath added grief to my sorrow. I fainted in my sighing, and I find no rest. Thus shalt thou say unto him, the Lord saith thus, behold, that which I have built will I break down, and that which I have planted I will pluck up, even this whole land. What land is that? And seekest thou great things for thyself? Seek them not. For behold, I will bring evil upon all flesh, saith the Lord. But thy life will I give unto thee for a prey in all places whither thou goest. What's going on? A promise of destruction, and then, but thy life will I give unto thee for a prey in all places. Who has another version other than the King James? Prize? Yeah, I've seen that. What does that mean? Thy life will I give unto thee as a prize in all places whither thou goest. Yeah, strange phrase. But, I mean, it's a promise, isn't it? I will spare your life in the midst of this destruction. Why is this passage in this lesson? Well, can you imagine being Jerusalem and being beset on all sides by hostiles? What does Baruch mean, by the way? As I was reading through, Baruch means blessed. I mean, he's the blessed one. It's a Hebrew. That would make sense. But thy life I will give unto thee as a prize, as a what else did you say, Pastor Jan? Hmm. It's interesting what you say. Reminds me of, I had a friend. He was very accomplished in management, and he one of his heroes and somebody who he read widely was Peter Drucker. Have you heard of Peter Drucker? And Peter Drucker was saying, when you're at your deathbed, what are people, something like this, when you're at your deathbed, what are people going to say? Are your children going to be fighting over your fortune? Is that what family is going to be to you at that point? Or are you going to have your family there comforting you? He said, this coming from this high level, someone who has conquered space and the concrete. And he was saying, well, it really comes down to family. Something's coming from Peter Drucker. If you don't mind, I'm just going to read something here. I think it's going to be relevant. The opening passage from Heschel and what you had just said reminded me of this. Opening paragraph, technical civilization is man's conquest of space. It is a triumph frequently achieved by sacrificing an essential ingredient of existence, namely time. By sacrificing an essential ingredient of existence, namely time, in technical civilization, we expend time to gain space. To enhance our power in the world of space is our main objective. In the world of space, create the physical, the concrete. Yet to have more does not mean to be more. The power we attain in the world of space terminates abruptly at the borderline of time. So we can conquer, but it's going to end. And I think that's kind of what Peter Drucker and you were getting at. But time is the heart of existence. Who's going to freeze their brain, right, for future generations? Cryogenics. Oh, yeah. Space for God. To be. And I think that the idea of conquering space will come back when we look at the story of Cain. I thought that was curious, but I think you're starting to pull that into perspective here. I found the inclusion of the story of Cain to be a little curious. Perhaps you didn't. Perhaps to you it made perfect sense. But we'll get to that story here. Tuesday and Wednesday, those were just in the interest of time, because I do want to get over to Thursday with the restless wanderer and the story of Cain. So the authors of the quarterly are biblical scholars, and on Tuesday there's an exploration of words in Hebrew which mean rest, and so Shabbat meaning one of them, being one of them. On Wednesday there is an exploration of words that mean rest in the New Testament, namely Greek. Do you happen to have does anyone have the quarterly with them, or? Yeah, you got it. So if you would, turn to page 10. Just a little etymological, a little divergence into a word study. Rest in the New Testament. A verb form for rest often found in the New Testament is anapao, to rest, relax, refresh. And then there's a number of instances where that verb appears in the Greek. 2 paragraphs down, starting with, when the epistle to the Hebrews in Hebrews 4:4 describes God's creation rest on the seventh day, it uses the Greek verb katapao. So anapao, katapao, what do those two verbs have in common? Anapao, katapao. Pao. Pao. Now, what word in English sounds like pao, P-A-U? It's related. We were talking about it very early. Pao, P-A-U. What English word contains P-A-U? P-A-U? Pause. When we pause. So pause in English is related to these two Greek words. To pause, to relax, to refresh. Mark 6:30-32. What happens in Mark 6:30-32? Or rather, what happens in that context of Mark? Jesus calls the disciples to pause, to rest. Why? What brought on this need to rest? Mark 6:30-32. Anyone willing to read that one aloud, clearly and distinctly?
Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they'd done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves.
And what is the context of that calling aside? What happened? just prior to this. The beheading of John the Baptist. That's a pretty, I don't mean to, stressful is not really quite the word I'm looking for, but it's the one that comes to mind. John the Baptist was beheaded. They bury his body. Verse 29. Well, verse 28. The executioner brought his head in a charger and gave it to the damsel, and the damsel gave it to her mother, who had a beef with the Baptist. And when the disciples heard of it, they came and took up his corpse and laid it in a tomb. And then Pastor Jan read from that point, and the apostles gathered themselves together unto Jesus. There were comings and goings. What does that mean? The comings and goings in the midst of this call to rest. So it's kind of it's a paradox. There's so much to be done. There's so much to do, and there are people to see and to comfort. But nevertheless, it is time to set aside, to depart. I think you mentioned it earlier. What word did you use? Throughout the week, we are harried by the media, just an incessant barrage of
constant information.
Constant information. Time to step aside from that, if only for a little while. Thursday, we come to the restless wanderer. Can you help me out with Cain? I mean, I think that, I'm sorry, what you were saying, I didn't catch your name. Liz, what you were saying about the conquering of, and how I heard you, the conquering of the physical world, perhaps, as opposed to shared the very unconcrete time with family, what we might say the things that really matter, which is interesting because matter has to do with physical things. This is matter, but what really matters is not in the concrete. Cain. So this is curious, and so I think we're getting somewhere because, if you would, Genesis 4:13. Clearly, the lesson doesn't wrap up, and I'm going to speak for myself, that the lesson just gives ideas for further thought. And I speak for myself, I'm not closing the book on this topic. I haven't figured this out. In case you haven't heard that already, Genesis 4:13-17. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. After God said, a fugitive and vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. Going back to the quarterly, bottom of page 11. We'll Cain was confused, worried about his safety in his reaction to God's judgment, and he had been cast out from the presence of the Lord. What does that have to do with the Sabbath? I think we were talking originally, or at least Pastor Jan mentioned that, what word did you use? Relationship?
I wish that the story went differently. I wish that Cain had sought some kind of reconciliation, that he had pleaded to be let back into God's graces. But instead, he's just concerned about himself. He's thinking about his safety, his rejection, and it's sad. I think that we didn't see any kind of reaching out for forgiveness or anything like that.
And he continued to be a vagabond, but he built a city which no longer exists. Yeah.
So what struck me as you read this passage about Cain was he said that his punishment was greater than he could bear. And I don't know. I mean, is it really his punishment that's greater than he can bear? Or is it the fact that he killed his brother and the guilt is greater than he can bear?
Selfish. He's not his brother's keeper, apparently. And is the punishment greater than he can bear? And what does that have to do with the Sabbath? Relationship.
He lost his relationship with the Lord. He was cut off.
I said he has no rest and he has no peace. He was a restless wanderer on the earth.
A fugitive and a vagabond.
So he had no Sabbath,
Yeah,
no rest.
he was on the run.
That's triggering some thinking in my mind. He had no Sabbath, he had no rest. In other words, it's that running, which you'd already referred to, that God wants to give us rest from. It's the constant desire to do things or to get places, but it's all our efforts. Those things are. And the Sabbath wants us to know that it's not all our efforts, that we need to rest in the efforts of Jesus. And that's the blessing that we're supposed to seek.
Yeah, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. He was no longer in his presence. That's a pretty dark fate. So with the few minutes we have, there are so many, there are some really good questions there on page 12. Looking at 4. Well, number 1 and 4. The constant pressure of being on top of things, being available physically or virtually all the time, and trying to live up to ideals that are neither realistic nor God-given can make people sick, emotionally, physically, spiritually. How can we as a church become welcoming for worn-out, tired people?
I think just to be compassionate and have empathy towards people and their needs. That's just the relationship as was brought up at the beginning.
What you mentioned there, in my notes here on page 15, from the Ministry of Healing, page 58. We must individually hear Him, God, speaking to the heart. When every other voice is hushed and in quietness we wait before Him, the silence of the soul makes more distinct the voice of God. He bids us be still and know that I am God. This is the effectual preparation for all labor for God. Amidst the hurrying throng and the strain of life's intense activities, he who is thus refreshed will be surrounded with an atmosphere of light and peace. And what you just said reminded me of this. He will receive a new endowment of both physical and mental strength. His life will breathe out a fragrance and will reveal a divine power that will reach men's hearts. So that's kind of interesting. So it's the relationship that can then be reflected elsewhere. So in a sense, were you saying that it's not just a Sabbath for us? It is a Sabbath for us that is diffused to those around us. That's really something to think about.
I think of the job that I've done working in healthcare over the last 4 years. A lot of times my job has required me to work every other weekend, or in some cases I've ended up working multiple weekends in a row. And in a lot of cases we have people, and rightly so, who work jobs who want to be able to have their Sabbaths off. For me, I look at it as my particular job as a way to give people rest. That I'm providing Sabbath for the people that I take care of, and it's a joy that I'm able to bring relief to those people, and I find a blessing in it that I don't think I had experienced before.
Yeah, that's quite a perspective that I hadn't really thought of.
The chaplain at the hospital, and I was on call on Sabbath. I would pray there in the office. I'd pray Sabbath morning and say, God, this is my church that I am serving today. I'm ministering to these people. And you direct my steps in ministering to your people today. And that's the way I looked at it. When I get a call and somebody needed to talk, or somebody, was in crisis, I was in some sense, a representative of God's presence in their lives and in their crisis.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, folks, thank you. That went by quickly. I could have spent some more time with you, but there'll be another time. So, Pastor, would you mind closing us out with a word of prayer, please?
Father in heaven, we are challenged to enter into your rest. Amidst our striving and our stress and our accomplishing, help us to learn to be in your presence and to absorb all the gifts that you have given to us in the Sabbath. And we thank you for teaching us and leading us and providing for our needs. Amen.
Thank you.